welcome to Steve McDonald's Arts and Crafts, and oddly enough, I'm on camera today rather than just seeing my hands. Now, what I'm doing today is I'm doing a video on which resin to use for which project. Now, I've been asked to do this video quite a lot recently. I did make this video probably about a year and a half, 2 years ago, but it's kind of a little bit out of date now, and hopefully I've got better at speaking to camera, and I've also got better at editing videos, and I've also got thinner, which is always a good thing. So, without too much further ado, let's get on. Now, there are lots of different resins out there, and there are lots of types of resins out there. We've got polyester resins, we've got polyurethane resins, and we've also got epoxy resins and UV resins. Now, you might think that they're all the same, and actually sometimes they kind of are, but there is a lot of difference between which resin you should use for which project. Now, I ultimately use resin colour resin, which is available in the UK, because I've shopped around and I so love their products. They are brilliant products and I'm really happy with them. So I'm going to be demonstrating those today. But the information that I'm giving you about each resin is still relevant regardless of which resin you use. So if you're in America, in Australia, in India, in Canada, or anywhere like that, and you're using resin, these rules still apply to you too, depending on which brand of resin that you buy. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is food-safe resin. Now, I have had lots of discussions over this, and there are companies that advertise their resin as being 100% food-safe. Now, I don't believe that any resin is food safe. I'm sorry, I don't. It's got free radicals in it. You put food on it that's got lots of fat in it, then it's going to possibly absorb it. And it's not been tested enough to find out whether it does transfer anything from the resin into the food. Although you can get resin that is suitable for incidental food contact. And what that means is that if you drop something on it and you pick it up straight away, then you're absolutely fine. Also, a lot of these companies that talk about food, I don't even have food safe resin in my studio, so I can't even show you it, but I am talking about it. If you look at the information that they give you on food safe resin, a lot of the companies say if you follow the exact instructions, and that means that you cannot add anything to it at all. So no mica powders, no alcohol inks, no pigments, pieces or flowers or anything like that, because it hasn't been tested with those things inside it, and we don't know how that may affect it. Also, when this is tested in a laboratory, it's tested under laboratory conditions. So that means it's at a consistent temperature when it cures. It's at a very, very precise amount mixing, so they're not out even slightly in part A or part B, and they cure it for an exact amount of time. And then it's still only food safe for incidental contact. So be very wary of any company, I think, my personal opinion, that is trying to sell you a resin that is food safe. Don't use it to cover a whole chopping board. Don't use it for spoons and mugs and glasses and things like that, because I think someone's going to come unstuck sometime, somewhere. So that's my opinion on food safe resin. I'm sorry to start it off with a bit of a but that is how I feel, and there's a lot of other people that feel the same way as me. There's a lot of people that bury their head in the sand and say, well, it says food safe, it's food safe, but believe me, I don't believe it is. So the second resin that I'm going to be talking about is art resin or coating resins or things like that. Now, some of them come as a 1-to-1 resin, some of them don't. I actually prefer the ones that are usually a 1 to 0.5 resin. So, for instance, if you use 100 ml of part A, then you would only use 50 ml of part B. And the reason is, I believe that they actually cure up much better, much firmer, much stronger, and are a lot harder, which is great if you're making small castings like jewellery and things. I use the Custom Cast Ultimate Art Resin by Resin Colour, okay? And this is unique to them. This isn't available by anybody else, and it's only available in the UK. But there are lots of resins out there, and one of the ones that I would suggest is Pro Marine, and I will link everything that I use today for all the 4 countries that I can link for in the description below. This is ideal for making shallow castings, so anything about this sort of depth would be ideal for these It's going to cure up nice. It's going to cure up lovely and hard. It's really nice and viscous, so it's ideal for doming as well. So, you know, I don't believe that you need to buy an extra doming resin and pay these silly prices for doming resins, when actually all you need to do is mix up your art resin, let it sit for a little while, get rid of any bubbles in there, let it thicken up slightly, although you don't need to with this one because it's nice and viscous, and then dome with that. Saves you a lot of money, and also saves you having different bottles of resin around that perhaps you're not going to be using up all the time. So art resin is great for pouring over pictures. It's great. It gives you a nice clear finish, and it's great for doing small castings with. If you do large and deeper castings, what you will find is it will cure up far too quickly. It will overheat. It will go yellow, because if resin overheats when it's curing, it tends to go yellow a lot quicker, and it might cure yellow. And I'll give you an example of that. This is what I keep my blue tack on, so that's blue tack on the bottom of that, and that was too deep for an art resin. I had it left over in a pot, forgot about it, and it cured up. And what happened is, as you can see, it's really quite, let's put it against that white of that bottle, it's really quite yellow. So that won't help. That wasn't Resin Colours resin, that was before I got hold of Resin Colour. My answer to you is use this for very shallow castings, and then use it for pouring over pictures. It takes colour lovely. You can put, if you want to, you can put alcohol inks in it. You can put mica powders, other pigments, and it doesn't bleach them out. And you can put dried flowers in it as well. So that's the art resin, which is an epoxy resin. So the next resin that I want to talk about is also an epoxy resin, and this is a casting resin. Now, a casting resin is ideal for casting those deeper moulds, let's say that moulds that are maybe a couple of inches or 4 centimetres in depth. So this is the sort of thing that I would use this resin for, or a casting resin for. So something about this size. Because what I know is it's not going to overheat. It's going to cast this nice and firm. It's going to take about 14 to 24 hours to cure up. Again, you can add any of the pigments that you want to it as an epoxy resin, keeping moisture out of it, you don't want water in it, and it will cast up lovely. I wouldn't go any deeper than this, that is for sure, but you can go shallower and larger. So for trays and things like that, a deeper tray, I would say use a casting resin. Now, it doesn't heat up and go too hot, because it's actually, again, it's not a 1-to-1 resin, it is a 1 ratio to 50 by weight. So 100 grams of part A to 50 grams part B. Again, mixing it all in, and you'll get a great result with it. Now, the next resin I want to talk about is a deep cast resin. And a deep cast resin is very different from your normal epoxy resins, even though it is an epoxy resin, because it can cast a lot deeper. People use it for things like river tables, big pyramids, any large castings, and it's brilliant for it. Deep cast resin, again, I use this one by Resin Colour, but in America and parts of Australia, it's not called a deep cast resin very often, it's called a slow cure resin, and that's exactly what it is. What happens is the heat reaction when you're mixing the resin up is a lot slower and a lot calmer. So you're not going to overheat the resin, get it to cure up, all shrink up, crack, and then maybe ruin your casting. It's going to cure over, depending on the temperature, it's going to cure over a 48 to 72 hours time frame. Now, I love this for making pyramids with. I think it's brilliant. And the other thing is, it is very liquidy, so it's not viscous at all. And so it will release bubbles coming out of it over time. So it carries on releasing bubbles for quite a long time, and you get a really nice, clear look to your final piece. Now, if you want to put this in your pressure pot, if you do have a pressure pot, then it really will give you a great effect. But you mustn't depressurize your pressure pot until the 72 hours are over. Because what will happen is the pressure pot on this will cause the pressure to shrink the bubbles down so that you can't see them, so it looks perfectly clear. But as this starts to go through the gel phase and curing up slowly, if you release the pressure in your pressure pot, what'll happen is those bubbles will expand again, and you will see those bubbles in that gel even if you repressurize it. So put it in your pressure pot by all means, although I don't really find that you need to do that, but put it in your pressure pot by all means, but keep it pressurized for the whole curing time. I love this. Now, most of the different deep cast or slow cure resins will tell you exactly what their maximum depth is, and it's really, really useful to know that. I know people push the boundaries. I push boundaries of resin all the time, as you know from my videos, but sticking to the manufacturer's advice on the depth is really worthwhile if you want to get that great result. So that's a deep cast or a slow cure resin. Now, there is something called a polyester resin. Now, I have used polyester resin, and I sometimes used it in the past if I was just casting little tiny figures or things like that. But actually, I don't use it now. Firstly, it absolutely reeks and it stinks out the whole of your studio. You must, as always, with any resin, be wearing some good quality masks and gloves. But you also need to have a really well ventilated area. But the other thing with polyester resin is I find it's very brittle, and if you drop it or you hit it with something, you can break it really easy. It has its place, but I'm not sure it has its place in my studio, so that is why I don't use polyester resin. I do, however, use polyurethane resin, or PU resin as it's known. And as you've seen, I've made a lot of different things with polyurethane resin, and I absolutely love it. It is a quick cure. You can start your project and you can finish your project within an hour most of the time. So if you want some quick castings, then you can do that. Now, again, the polyurethane resin that I use is the one by Resin Color. And again, I love this. It's an easy measurement. It's all done by weight, and it's on a one-to-one basis. You do need to work really, really quickly with this, because depending on which polyurethane resin you use, and I will link them in the description below, you can get some that cure up within 10 minutes, or you can get some that cure up, like this one, in about 30 to 40 minutes. Now, I think I get about a 2-minute pot time, 2 or 3 minute pot time with this. But that is enough because I'm all prepared for the work that I want to do, and it will give me enough pot time to do what I want to do with it. Always make sure whenever you get polyurethane resin that you give it a really, really good shake first, because it will settle out sometimes. So that is really, really important to do. There are lots of different polyurethane resins, and you can get clear polyurethane resins as well as the opaque white ones. I like the opaque white ones for the work that I do. And that's ideal for casting with, it's ideal for doing some swirls with, and different bits and pieces. Certainly cold casting is brilliant, I think, with this. And the great thing about polyurethane resin is it dries and cures really, really hard. So if you're making things like stands for your phone, or something that you don't want to bend and warp out of shape, this is your resin, because it will dry lovely and hard. 5-minute epoxy resin, and I use 5-minute epoxy resin quite a lot as a glue. I don't really use it for anything else. I use it if I want to attach two pieces together or add something to something else. And I think it's great for that. I wouldn't use it for casting or anything like that, because it's so bubbly when you mix it up, and literally you have 5 minutes. But it's a great little addition if you want to be using something to create and add something or stick something to something fairly quickly. Now, there are lots of different UV resins out there, and UV resin cannot be poured too deeply. The other thing with UV resin is you have to be careful of how much pigment you put into it, because if you make it too opaque, it's not going to cure up. I like UV resin for certain things, although I know there are people out there that make the most beautiful jewellery and beautiful things with UV resin. I'm just not that talented, I don't think, with UV resin. Always make sure that your UV resin that you've got the right wavelength of torch to use with it. And I try and have the most powerful torch that I can, which is this one. I love this torch for this UV resin. It cures it really quickly. I never have any problems with it curing. I do have a UV torch, which is this one, but it's nowhere near as powerful and sometimes takes ages. The more powerful the torch, the better cure that you're going to get with it, and the easier that you're going to find using this. Now, as I said, you can make small pieces of jewellery with it, you can use it as a glue, but really it is quite limited, but it's nice limited. So if it is all jewellery that you want to make, then you can use this to make just small pieces of jewellery. And you can put things inside it like flowers and things like that as well, no problem at all. I would say the best way to cure this is put it outside for 15 minutes if you've got a nice sunny day, and that I think is the best way to cure it. But unfortunately in the UK, we don't get nice sunny days very often, so that's not an option for us. What I would say is as well, depending on the resin that you're using, ensure that you mix it correctly using the absolutely most accurate measurements you possibly can. I always test my jugs and things to see how accurate they are, because the plastic cups that come from a lot of companies that are like this but with the marks on, the really cheap ones, I use some of them for a time and they are the measurements are so way out. I also know a lot of people that say, oh, never use a popsicle stick to mix your resin because it releases bubbles. Yeah, okay, it probably does release a few bubbles, and if you would leave it in there, it might leave a trail of bubbles. I've never really found that myself. I use them all the time, but when I use them, I always wipe them off afterwards, and that just really embeds the resin into them. This one's got covered in resin, and you would never know, so that's never going to leak any bubbles out of it anyway. But if you don't want to use lolly sticks, then there are the silicone or the plastic ones that you can use that will help you mix your resin. Always mix your resin to the manufacturer's instructions as well. That's really, really important, because you want to make sure that you've got everything mixed in. You don't want to be having patches that aren't mixed, because that's not going to cure up properly. And I'm sure there's some resins out there that I've missed out, and I know that there are, but these are the really useful ones to know about if you're using resin as a crafter and as somebody that's trying to sell their jewellery and bits and pieces to the general public. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and please boot that like button, because it really does help my video to get out there, and I think it's quite important to get out there. Never use resin without using the correct PPE, because if not, you will get health problems. Always work in a ventilated area. Use scales that are as accurate as possible, because that's really important, and use pots that have got very accurate markings on them for measuring out. Check out the video that's coming up next. It's another tips and tricks video that I think you might find really, really useful. Enjoy your resin. Take care. Bye.